Moving on to Carl Johnson, our next presenter running for Senate. Carl.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Carl Johnson. I'm a small business owner in the tourism industry. My other work in Alaska has included working as an attorney, a photographer, and a natural resources manager. It's been a pleasure to be a part of our great community. I grew up in a military family, so that meant I moved around a lot. I served in the Navy so I could put myself through college. By the time I moved to Alaska, I had lived in 6 different states and 1 U.S. territory. I chose Alaska as the place where I wanted to live, even without even visiting here. While a law student, I sent resumes to every judge in Anchorage and was interviewed over the phone and hired to work as a law clerk in the court system. The 21 years I've lived here is the longest I've ever lived in one place. I've been fortunate to visit all corners of the state, from Kaktovik to False Pass, Ketchikan to Kotzebue, seeing and working with people or spending time with people as they're working on commercial fishing boats or doing seismic surveys out in the Beaufort Sea. I have friends from Wrangell to Wiseman to Naknek. This is the place where I've met my wife. Alaska is my home. Alaska is a land of promise and opportunity, but we all know that that opportunity has been lacking lately, even before COVID-19. We've seen a state budget that's been cut, but we need a state budget that funds essential services of government, funding infrastructure and public safety, creating an educated workforce, and prioritizing the growth of a diverse and innovative economy. We need a permanent fund that is sustainable, that can perform as it was designed well into the future. That means growing the corpus of the fund and not depleting our earnings reserve. We need a plan to help get our economy out of COVID-19, to help it to recover. These will be my goals as a senator. Now, some candidates want to cut our budget even more, even though we've cut our budget 50% in the last 8 years. Budget cuts have consequences. Underfunded agencies hurt the ability of businesses to grow, from delaying issuing the permits to not being able to get important answers to important questions. Lacking or broken infrastructure harms the ability of businesses to compete. An underfunded education system, including our university, means that businesses have to look farther away for educated workforce, and Alaskan youth have to look elsewhere for opportunity. Through my career, both here and outside, I've worked in all 3 branches of government at the county, tribal, state, and federal level. My experience have taught me the importance of public service, of listening to constituents, keeping them informed, and sometimes making hard choices. I will take my role as an Alaska State Senator seriously, working to serve our great state in a manner that creates opportunities. I'm not running to prove party purity, but to be a public servant. I will look for creative solutions to our challenging problems and work with any legislator who is fighting to move Alaska forward. And I look forward to working hard for the people of Girdwood down in Juneau. Thank you.
The following are questions that were presented ahead of time, and we have Roger, Carl, and Care off of mute, so feel free to chime in. We have a full 10 minutes to facilitate your answers, so feel free to be brief so we can get through several of the questions that came in. The first one, what is your solution to fixing the Department of Transportation's funding, on which a lot of our livelihoods affect?
Well, I'll let Roger jump in since he worked for DOT.
I did work for DOT, and I tell you, we had many times where we were visited by the powers that be, and they talked to us about budgets. You know, we have some hard decisions ahead. I do believe the Alaska Marine Highway System is important, but here we are. We probably have been down to 2 to 3 vessels for the last 8 months or more, and I don't believe we've let the first ferry crew member go. I mean, I don't believe that those kind of cuts are what's going to fix the problem, but that's what we're facing. We're just drowning in spending, and we do have spending problems. My solution for the budgets is not going to be a good one. We will have to use some savings in the short term. We're 1.6 to 2.5 billion short this year. That's nothing new. We've been 3 billion short every year for the last 6 years, but we do need to get our spending under control.
Thank you, Roger. Carl or Carol?
I'll,
Carolyn?
I'll jump in. So I think the important thing when we're talking about cutting budgets is to remember what that translates to. First of all, when we're talking about DOT, that's missed opportunities for federal matching funds. When we're talking about jobs, the Institute of Social and Economic Research has indicated that roughly 100 million in budget cuts equals about 1,000 private and public sector jobs lost. So if we're talking about cutting budgets, we're also talking about cutting thousands of jobs during a recession. So those are kind of some big things I think of, but also if we're talking about DOT projects specifically, if we have projects that were envisioned 20 years ago, we should redetermine whether or not they're still viable 20 years later when we're spending money on them. Like what's going on in the Seward Highway right now was based on a diamond center and its level of traffic volume flowing to that area 20 years ago. So I think we need to also reevaluate whether or not we need to be spending money.
Thank you, Carl. Care?
Well, I absolutely agree that the ferry system is vital to all the communities on the coast. And I do know that there are a lot of people in Girdwood that are employed with the ferry. So I really object to the cuts on the ferry. I don't know exactly what we can do right now. But definitely the ports and the few ships that are in service need to be maintained, and we need to keep that going. And we need to look for new sources of revenue to take care of that.
Thank you. The next question that was provided in advance is, what topic is important to Girdwoodians and how would you address it with specific details?
Well, I go first again. Tourism. Girdwood is one of our tourism hubs around here, and that gets back to we really need to reevaluate how we responded to the COVID-19 pandemic, and going forward, we really have to just understand that we just can't shut the economy down.
Thank you, Roger. Carl?
Yeah, I'll jump in and agree. Tourism is important to the Girdwood economy. I'm a tourism operator myself, and my business takes me in the Girdwood area frequently. I think that one of the things we need to make sure is when we're looking at how we're going to invest our funds in the legislature, the destination marketing program is an important area to invest money. It has a really good rate of return for the money that we put into it. And the more we can spend money on promoting individual travelers to come to Alaska, that will benefit more the town of Girdwood, which is not a cruise ship-based tourism location. I also know that the folks in Girdwood are also concerned about law enforcement, and there have been cuts to that community recently and the availability of law enforcement and public safety in general, and also the traffic flow in the area. There's a current project that's being considered that may have some consequences for the view that people have of the Girdwood turnout. So those are things that I'm aware of. And again, it gets back to funding and being careful and considerate with it.
Thank you, Carl. Care?
Well, yes, I was very upset when the Anchorage mayor and assembly closed down all the businesses that are hospitality businesses, restaurants, bars. I mean, the Girdwood was hurting already with the lack of tourists, and to go through and actually shut those businesses down for a month was cruel. And also, I look at Girdwood and it's like almost completely self-sufficient, and it just seems really odd to me that Anchorage could have such an effect on your businesses and your tourism when and there was no concern for the Girdwood community at all in that. So that's one of the things that I think is really, really vital, is to keep in mind that. Plus, I know that the fire and the police protection in Girdwood are not coming from Anchorage Central. And I think that, again, that is something that makes me feel that Girdwood itself needs to make a way for themselves away from the town of Anchorage.
Thank you.
I don't know what I could do about that in the state. So
The next question is, what is your position on the school bond reimbursement to local districts?
Well, the school bond reimbursement plan, you know, it's a challenge. It's the way school bonds were sold for years, and then everyone was shocked when we finally realized we could not continue spending. I'm not in favor of the school bond reimbursement to districts. If we're going to pass a bond, we have to take responsibility for it.
I would agree. I would agree with Roger on that. The thing that's very inequitable about that is in the villages and the other parts of the state, they do not do anything like that because they don't have a tax base. They don't have bonds passed. They don't contribute to the price of the schools. And it's pretty inequitable that Anchorage has to, you know, it's just not working right. So if we pass bonds to make the Anchorage schools better, it needs to be paid for by the Anchorage taxpayers. And but we should be able to build schools. We should be able to get enough to have decent schools from what we get from the state with the SBA.
Thank you, Care. Carl?
I'm going to jump in and disagree with Roger and Care on school bond reimbursements. I think the most important investment you can make in the future of any economy is in education. And not every community has an equal ability to pay for education. We do have one of the highest costs of education in the state, but that's because we have a really sparse population, you know, one person per square mile roughly. It takes more to get education out to rural Alaska. So I think that we've seen from history the importance and the value of investing in education. And if we have a system where we promise we're going to reimburse for education, then we should fulfill that promise.
Christina, if I've been going first every question, I have just a quick follow-up.
Sure, we have time.
Just to mention, like talking about what Carl says. First of all, it was a promise we made in years gone by. It's a promise we won't make from here forward. But the stats I've seen is only about 50% of our education funds actually make it to the classroom. And why is that? Because we are administrative heavy in the school system. And so we do spend, we're like third highest in the nation per student for spending on our students. So those bonds are typically roofs, you know, rebuilding roofs or whatever. Those should be built into maintenance programs. We should look at the money we spend. And when we build a school, you got to take care of it. I mean, you just can't throw a bond out every time you have to replace a roof. And we're also getting away from brick and mortar buildings now. We're doing, because of the coronavirus, we're doing more home learning. Are we going to continue to build and maintain large schools that we may not be using in the future? Thanks.
You're welcome. Any other rebuttals?
I'll throw in real quick. You know, I've spoken to educators here in Anchorage, and when they talk specifically about this notion of cutting the cost of administrators, the phrase I've heard is, yeah, we cut the fat, but now we're cutting into meat and bone. So I think that that's no longer a line that really works with educators and with education.
Okay, Carl, there's 54 superintendents in the state of Alaska, 54. We're not really talking about Anchorage when we talk about cutting administration. We're talking about schools that have 12 students in them and are a school district and have a superintendent and a principal for that school and a school board and an office, a district office with employees in it. That is, especially in this era where we have a lot of internet, and right now, look what we're doing. It's not necessary that we have that many administrators in a small community like that. And a lot of these communities are geographically inside a larger community that may even have its offices in Anchorage, for all we know. So some of these communities can be combined. And when we talk about combining administrative staff, we're not necessarily talking about Anchorage, where they might have principals and assistant principals and and a lot of people in the what we used to call the head shed. You know, there are a lot of people there, but we are also talking about those small communities where, you know, in our area, a school of 12 children. I mean, this is like the one-room schoolhouse, and they have a whole staff of people for that one-room schoolhouse. So I think, you know, there's a lot more to this than looking around Anchorage. You have to look at the bush. You have to figure out what's going on out there. And again, like I was saying before, they don't get, they don't even do school bonds, and they have very small schools, but they have a lot of staff, a lot of adult staff. In fact, in my village where I lived, it was considered one of the primo jobs because there were no other jobs. So everybody wanted to work at the school.
Thank you, Kara. I'm glad you made that point because, you know, in the law, we have this thing called assuming facts, not in evidence. I'm not necessarily going to concede your story that there's a 12-person school out there that has more administrators than students. But it's important to note when we're talking about our economy, we also have to remember our rural economy. And Kara, you've lived in villages. I've not, but I've spent a lot of time. And one of the number one things I hear people talking about in villages is economic opportunity. And those people who have those jobs, they pay for gas that fuels boats that go up to hunt for moose and caribou. They pay for maintenance. They pay for a lot of things more than just their households. So I look forward to you identifying whose jobs in rural Alaska you would be happy to cut in order to trim down the fat in the administration.
Thank you, Carl. I'd like to move on to our last question about healthcare, shifting focus now. We all know that healthcare is expensive here in Alaska and continues to rise. For the small businesses here in Girdwood, as well as those that are self-employed that are suffering the brunt of the cost increases, specifically because more than half of Alaskans get healthcare from the government or large employers, how could you help them?
Well, I think as a legislature, the first thing we can do is investigate what is driving the costs of healthcare in Alaska. Ivy Sponhold's bill, I think, was a really good first start, and that is letting people know up front what their costs are going to be. Because we have personal experience in my family of having to have a necessary medical procedure and not knowing how much it's going to cost until after it's already said and done. So targeting and controlling costs is one thing. But there are things that states can do to implement their own types of healthcare systems. We have to be creative. We have to look at what's available. I'm not favoring cutting more to healthcare. I know Roger ran on a platform of supporting Governor Dunleavy, and last year, had Roger been in office, he would have supported Governor Dunleavy's vetoes of 73 million in healthcare cuts to Alaskans.
Thank you, Carl.
I'd like to kind of come in here on this. One of the big problems with healthcare in Alaska is access. There's, for one thing, there are a lot of doctors that don't even want to take Medicare patients, for instance. And when I have talked to providers, they've said, well, we take Medicare patients, and it would be great if every provider in Alaska would have a certain number of Medicare patients that they would take, because that would take care of that problem. And I feel that that's pretty big for us older people, that we can't even find doctors that will take us. So I'd like to address that when I'm in the Senate. The other thing is the discrepancy between what people get paid. The providers they get paid more with Medicaid than they do with Medicare, which is another reason that they don't like to take the Medicare patients. So the more we expand the government control over over Medicare and Medicaid, the less access some of our Alaskans will have. So there's a lot there that we need to look at as far as pricing. I agree with the price transparency that Ivy Sponhold's bill recognized, and I hope that that is something that we can keep on working on and have that really very good. And I know that some doctors do give discounts to cash paying patients. So that is something else that is, I think, very nice. And that is, that's a voluntary thing that the medical providers do. But we do need some overseeing of the insurance that's going on in Alaska. And we need to help those doctors that do choose to see Medicare and Medicaid patients.
Thank you, Care.
Mhm.
Roger?
Well, first, fixing the economy, getting us back to work, getting people making money again. That's a big help. Some of these solutions are going to have to come from outside of Alaska. Just today, President Trump was talking about his alternative to the Affordable Care Act, and we'll have to get into things like allowing insurance across states and stuff like that. We do have a lot of problems with our healthcare system. Once again, that's one of the top 3 drivers in our budgets. And we can do cost savings in there. Medicaid, we made some big mistakes under Governor Walker. The Indian Health Service, when they were given access to Medicaid, the federal government went from being the #1 guarantor of IHS payments to being, I think, number 2 or 3 behind Alaska. Alaska became #1. So we have big picture budget problems we can maybe solve. But once again, I think the big secret here in Alaska is get our economy running again, get us back to work.
Thank you very much, Roger. I appreciate that. Any other rebuttals in the 2 minutes we have left in this slot?
I just wanted to throw in one thing too that the COVID-19 has showed us, and that is if we could have an increased availability of telemedicine, that would be a benefit. Again, in our household, we had to make some appointments and only seeing our doctor via the internet. And that broadband access, increasing that, making it more available throughout the state would make more access to doctors through that method.
I'll chime in with Carl real quick. Honestly, I experimented with telemedicine years gone by and just stopped using it totally because it was ineffectual. I think now the coronavirus has actually given telemedicine some teeth where you can actually get real medical care over a Zoom meeting these days.
I will agree with that. I think that if there's any good outcome from this, and there are few from this pandemic, it is that the telemedicine, which is especially important in Alaska, telemedicine is much better than it has ever been. But the other thing is, though, because of the pandemic, people did miss important appointments. People didn't get the x-rays when they were supposed to get them, or the CAT scans when they were supposed to get them. They didn't get their regular checkups. And a lot of people have had difficulty or become more ill because of this. And this is really touches home with me because we have a son with cancer and it got a lot worse during the pandemic. So I think that we need to we all need to get back to work, and we need to get back to a normal. And I will say that.
Thank you much, both Roger, Carl, and Care, for presenting your positions for the Senate.
Paid for by Carl Johnson for Alaska. P.O. Box 11022, Anchorage, Alaska 99511.